Following World War II, the Allied powers had to deal with the German question. They had to figure out what to do with the defeated Germany. Each country had a different vision for what they wanted post-Germany to look like. The Soviets and French wanted to strip Germany of any and all industrialization and leave Germany a country of farmers. This was because they had been invaded by Germany twice in the last 30 years and were worried about another possible invasion. The United States and Great Britain, however, saw Germany as a bulwark against communism and felt that a strong Germany was essential to contain communist expansion. These two views were diametrically opposed to one another. As a result, the countries were unable to come to an agreement about the future of Germany. To avoid the difficult decisions regarding the future of Germany, the Allied powers decided to divide Germany into zones of occupation. Germany would be divided into 4 zones. The demilitarization of Germany in each zone would be overseen by the country in charge of that zone and administered by the Allied Control Council. America, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union were each given control of part of Germany. At the time, this division was seen as a temporary solution, while the Allied powers figured out a more permanent solution to the German question. However, as the powers discussed possible answers to the German question, they found that they were unable to come to an agreement. This was because of a fundamental conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. As discussed before, they had different views of the future of Germany. As both France and Great Britain were in need of U.S. economic aid, they sided with the Americans, and the situation quickly broke down into a conflict between the East and the West. As distrust between the East and the West continued to grow, economic conflict, namely reparations, became central to the development of the Cold War. Neither the USSR nor the Western powers were entirely meeting the original agreements set forth for reparations. The Soviets were not delivering enough food to the western parts of Germany and were becoming secretive about what they were taking from Germany. So the Western powers stopped shipping supplies to the Soviets. In addition, political conflict brought Germany into a central role into the Cold War. Each side wanted to unify Germany under their own political ideology, but the reality was that this was nearly impossible to do. As such, the Western powers consolidated their zones and began drafting a West German constitution, and the Soviet leaders began planning their own separate regime in the East. A part of the plan for a West German democracy was to introduce a new German currency, as the old one was nearly worthless. Stalin realized that this meant the establishment of a functional Germany in the West, and sought to stop this by enacting the Berlin Blockade. In addition to the split of Germany, Berlin, which lay in East Germany, was split between the 4 occupying powers. Hence, there was a West Berlin that was overseen by the Western powers, USA, France, and Britain, and an East Berlin overseen by the USSR. Stalin sought to force the Westerners out of Berlin by stopping food and energy supplies from reaching Western Berlin starting in June 1948. However, the Westerners simply supplied Berlin from the air by dropping crates of supplies into the city. This was called the Berlin Airlift. Former Army pilots became cargo pilots, bringing much-needed supplies, food, coal, and even candy. They were called the Candy Bombers. As Stalin realized his blockade was ineffective, he ended it in early May 1949. The significance of this, the first major conflict of the Cold War, was that the major powers realized that they were unable to reach any agreement about the future of Germany. As such, it led to the division of Germany into 2 parts: democratic Western Germany and communist Eastern Germany. Once Germany had been split into 2 parts, it revealed the disparities between Soviet-controlled East Germany and American, British, French-controlled West Germany. In West Germany, the standard of living was significantly higher than in East Germany. West Germany was larger, had a greater population and industrial output, and received Marshall aid. In contrast, East Germany underwent leader Walter Ulbricht's post-1949 program of collectivization and socialism, which was disastrous for the economy and led to a sharp drop in living standards. As historians Merriman and Winter say, quote, Berliners suffered the loss of more than half their living space and about 60% of their workplaces. Because of this, East Germans began to flood out of East Germany through Berlin. However, Berlin was a more serious source of conflict between the Americans and the Soviets, as it was there that the economic and political disparities between the two nations were most apparent. Because of these disparities and the ease with which each one could travel from East Germany to West Germany through Berlin, 1/6 of the German population moved from East Germany to West Germany. This problem was all the more serious for the Soviets because the majority of Germans emigrating from their sphere of influence were young and skilled East Germans. To remedy these problems, Khrushchev proposed a treaty that would recognize the existence of the two Germanys, but more importantly, would change Berlin into a free city, which would require Westerners to remove their troops from West Berlin. If the Allies refused to agree to this treaty, he threatened to turn East Berlin over to East Germany, which would have been problematic for the Westerners. This proposal was met with Western outrage. They had drawn the line in Berlin during the blockade. They vowed to maintain their presence in West Berlin while at the same time pushing for a united Germany, as say historians Baker and Haynes. Therefore, it was dropped on May 27, 1953. However, this proposal brought the German question back to the forefront of discussion, and in the summer of 1959, both sides met in Geneva to discuss German unity. However, neither side was willing to meet the other side's demands, and no decision was reached, even at later meetings. Then, in 1960, John F. Kennedy was elected President of the United States, and he had a different approach to resisting communism. He was moving away from the policy of massive retaliation. Khrushchev, who thought he could get a different response out of the inexperienced Kennedy, renewed his demand that Berlin become a free city. However, Kennedy wanted to appear tough on communism and responded by increasing military spending. Under the increased tension, the flow of refugees from east to west increased. This angered East Germany leadership like Ulbricht, who favored a Soviet takeover of West Berlin, which could then be made part of East Germany, from the book Germany and Berlin. Because of mutually assured destruction, Khrushchev, quote, believed such an action was too aggressive and likely to provoke war with the West, which he was not willing to risk because of the nuclear repercussions that would follow it, from the same book Germany and Berlin. To finally put a stop to it, Khrushchev had a barbed wire fence erected between East and West Berlin on the 13th of August, 1961. This fence was almost like a sign of defeat for Khrushchev and the Soviet Union, as it meant that the Soviets were unable to come to an agreement with the Americans about the Germany problem, and that they had to create a barrier to keep their citizens in their communist country, or workers' paradise. Quote, the open traffic between the two parts of the city had meanwhile become the only opening in the otherwise sealed-off East German Republic, to the point that it endangered its very existence. The erection of the Berlin Wall on the 13th of August, 1961, therefore, marked a point of no return for the city's further development, say historians Merriman and Winter.
However, the Berlin Wall did settle the German question and eliminate it as a key issue in Cold War negotiations, as both sides were happy with the outcome. The Soviets were able to keep their citizens in their country, and the USA was pleased because a war did not have to be fought over Berlin. Overall, because of its geographic position between the East and the West, the power vacuum that was created after the World War II, the different visions for post-war Germany held by the two superpowers, and the economic disparities that existed between the two Germanys, Germany became the first Cold War battleground. The Berlin Wall became a symbol of the outcome of this battle. Rodgers and Thomas, in their book The Cold War, said that the Berlin Wall stood as a powerful symbol of the division between East and West. It seemed as if the idea of an Iron Curtain as put forward by Winston Churchill during his Fulton speech in 1946 had finally come true. It was in Germany where sides were chosen, lines were drawn, and the Cold War had its first cold clash.